Hello everyone, this is Dr. Vishal Sharma. I'm principal at Metanoia Inc. and moderator of the Carry Ethernet group on LinkedIn. And I'm back once again with another one of my network architecture and design series videos. And this one is titled, What You Should Know About Doing Business with Telcos Today. And the genesis of this comes from attending the flagship panel, which is the last panel of the day at the TC3 Summit in Silicon Valley last week. And what this panel is, it brings together a collection of telco executives and was moderated by Gary Cohen of ITG, who's really an excellent host and moderator. And the idea was to elicit from these telcos what are the best practices for doing business with telcos today. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a startup, if you are an entrepreneurial group looking to interact with telcos in the current environment, what are the key things that you should keep in mind as you start making inroads into the telcos? So the way I'm going to present the video today is I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of the panel and the different telcos that were on it. And then I'm going to highlight for you the 5 key questions that I gleaned from this panel that were put forth to the CXOs that were on the panel, and give you my take and analysis of what the answers were for those 5 questions, and a couple of counterintuitive insights that also came out of it. So for me to do that, let me quickly share my screen with you so we can walk through that together. And at this point, every one of you should be able to see my screen. And as you see, these are lessons from the TC3 Summit's operator panel, which happens at the last day of the event, and I had a bunch of operators. So let's get started. So first of all, the panel, as I said, was moderated by Gary Cohen, Market Research Director at ITG. And Gary is a very astute host. He spent half of his career actually being on the operator side, working with operators like AT&T and Verizon and so forth, and the remaining half of his career actually selling to the operators. So somebody who's very accomplished on both sides and is the perfect host and moderator for something like this. And then there were a bunch of telcos that you can see were from panelists from around the world, from Europe, Asia, North America, and even different parts of Asia and different parts of Europe. So the telcos around the world that were represented were, we had David Barron, head of the corporate business development group at Cable Labs. Now, Cable Labs, as many of you know, is the neutral conglomeration of what I would say the brain trust that the cable MSOs in the US have put together, and Cable Labs defines standards for the cable community, like the DOCSIS series of standards, and does a lot of other lab work, a lot of other investigation, architecture work on behalf of the telcos. But what they do is generally very applicable to not just the cable community, of course, but telcos in general. Then we had Winston Damarillo, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at Smart. Now, Smart is a joint venture, wholly owned subsidiary of PLDT in the Philippines. And for those of you who don't know, the Smart was the first to roll out 4G services in the Philippines. They, of course, have the mandatory 2G, 3G, and other services as well. And they are an arm of PLDT that's looking at disruptive business models and is tapping into a lot of the startups in their attempt to do that. And not just startups in Silicon Valley, but really all across the globe in order to do that. Now, the other carrier was O2 out of the Czech Republic, and they were represented here by Gustav Grondin, their Chief Strategy Officer. Now, the interesting part about O2 is that they are a carrier that is working with the population of the size of the state of Michigan, which is about 9.9 million people, in a state the size of South Carolina, which is about 32,000 square kilometers. So that's really what the Czech Republic is all about. Now, the unique thing that Gustav pointed out about O2 is that being a smaller operator, they're very open to opening up their core networks and their APIs for applications and solutions developers. Now, that is very interesting because that makes a test bed, if you will, available to smart entrepreneurs, new entrepreneurial companies, application developers, and so on, that can actually try out the APIs of O2 to access their network and therefore try out new ideas and new innovative strategies or applications, products, etc. that they've developed. Now, this reminds me actually of another operator called JT Telecom, which is out of Ireland, which have a very similar strategy. They've also made their network available for experimentation because they're a very small carrier but have a very diverse, very rich network. And I heard that last year at the Carrier Network Virtualization Conference that JT had also made their network available for experimentation, just like O2 did. Now, the next carrier on the panel was NTT DOCOMO Innovations, and they were represented by Tomofumi Miura, their chief operating officer. Now, the key thing that Tomofumi pointed out was that NTT DOCOMO has 66 million subscribers, does $4 billion in revenue, and therefore it has more than half the population of Japan as its customers. And for them, innovation means anything that is likely to generate more than $10 million in revenue in Japan in the next 2 to 3 years. So that's how they define innovation. And so if you're going to go to them with an idea, that's kind of the ballpark you ought to be looking at. And the next panelist was Adrian Shatku, CEO of UNIFI Communications. Now, UNIFI is actually a very diverse carrier kind of carrier that operates in 25 countries around the world, although they have offices in New York City. And over the years, they have focused on the emerging market. They do voice, value-added services, and data across the globe as a carrier's carrier in a carrier's carrier environment. But of late, they have actually been diversifying and approaching both the utilities, so the gas companies and the power companies and your electricity company, as well as delving into the industrial Internet of Things. So that was kind of the panelists that we had. And as you can see, they represent a wide spectrum all across the globe, in multiple countries. And now let me quickly highlight for you first what the questions were that were posed by Gary to the panelists. So here are the questions that we asked the telcos, that were asked of the telcos this year. The first one was, and these were asked from the perspective of a startup or an entrepreneurial group that is actually going to the telcos. So the first thing you would ask if you were doing such a startup or a group is, what do you want to go through the door with? And what should that look like? So when you're approaching a telco, what kind of materials, information, insights do you want to have with you as you walk through that door? And what should be the form of that information? The next was, how do you approach and know the needs of the telco? So how do you actually, so okay, you know what you want to go through the door with, but what background work should you do to identify the needs to develop that specific presentation or insight that you're actually going to approach the telco with? And then how do you learn what the strategy of the telcos is? Next, how do you get your foot in the door? You may have no contacts, no email address, and nothing at all. You may have an idea, you may have done the first 2 or 3 bullets worth of work, but then how do you get your foot in the door? And the panel talked about that, and Gary shared some insights about that. And finally, the panel at the end gave some rules of engagement that you must use in order to get the attention of the telcos throughout the world. And these rules of engagement, you will see, differ from region to region, but there are some common rules that are worth paying attention to. And finally, there were 2 counterintuitive insights that came out of the panel that I at least got that I'm going to share with you. So these were the 5 questions. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to now walk you through these questions one by one and share with you the insights that I gathered from this panel as I heard these operators. So the very first question was, what do you want to go through the door with? And what should that look like? Now I'm going to refer liberally to my notes here so I can make sure that I give you guys like the best information from my analysis of the panel. So they said that what you need to go through the door with is information that is relevant to their customer base, okay? And that is relevant to their current focus and some of their prime considerations that they are looking at. And what would be examples of these? For example, they may have a need to serve non-traditional customers in non-traditional telco markets. This is something that Smart articulated. Or they may need to utilize their existing assets better. This is something that O2 said. Or as I have pointed out in my summaries of the TC3 takeaways in a different video, they may need to expand coverage to different parts of the country, which is something that EE articulated very well when their ex-CEO Mansoor Hanif presented at TC3 earlier this year. So that's what you need to be able to walk through the door with. Now the question, of course, is how do you develop the insights and how do you know what these needs are to be able to even walk through the door with these kinds of relevant information that's relevant to the customer base or to their current focus? Now, the answer to this came in very interesting ways. For example, Winston Damarillo of Smart said that you should approach them by helping them project what their customer base in the future is going to look like and how are they going to serve the digital customer. This was one example. On the other hand, Adrian of UNIFI mentioned that you should think about how you can help them unlock new value in their existing assets. And I think this was also echoed by Gustav Grondin of O2. So that's how you should approach the telco. But then how should you know the needs that the telcos have? Well, almost all of the CXOs unequivocally mentioned that you have to invest some time and energy in doing background research. Now, but what should you do the research in? For one thing, you should learn about the country, which is kind of obvious. I mean, the telcos are housed in many different countries. So you need to learn about the country and you need to research the local market. And of course, there are multiple resources, Google included, for us to be able to do that. So Winston of Smart and even Gary himself said that you must be able to do the background research to understand the environment in which that telco is operating, because that's going to give you critical insights into how you should approach that telco. Now, the next question we had is, how do you learn what their strategy is? Now, for this, there was some excellent insight that came from David of Cable Labs, who said that, look, you have to focus on what the key executives are saying. All right, look at the press releases, look at their comments to the press, look at their interviews, look at their earnings call, and zero in on what they're saying, and more importantly, what they're saying about what they are looking for next. Because that's going to be your biggest clue about where the operator mindset is going. Second, and this came from Tomofumi of NTT DOCOMO, he said, look at what the competitors are doing, and then try to see how your target carrier might be able to do better than their competitors, because that's one thing the operators are very interested in. And this again ties back to my TC3 summary and the takeaways from there, which is that the telcos are pretty smart. They are looking to taking the lead from their other competitors in terms of what they are doing, both in terms of how they should orchestrate their strategy, in terms of what they should perhaps do or shouldn't do. And therefore, by looking at the competitors, you can go to the telco with a proposal of how they can target the same kind of application, the same kind of services, but do it one better. And the reason for doing that is all the operators and the carriers are struggling with revenue. So any ideas that you can take of how they can approach their customers better, how they can perhaps do better than their competitors and get more revenue is sure to catch attention. Now, the main question, of course, is, given all of this, how do you get your foot in the door? And Gary pointed out that there traditionally, at least in the North American market, there are three ways to do that. You can have a veteran consultant who can guide you in your approach. You can work with an expert on a contract basis. You can, of course, go at it yourself, which is one way to do that, or you can get a carrier on your board of directors. But the operators from different parts of the world had some other suggestions which were very interesting. One is they said, look, find a focused event which is intimate, which allows you to have one-on-one interactions with the operator reps of the kind that we're on this panel, namely the chief strategy officers, the chief innovation officers, the chief operating officers, the talent scouts, whose whole role is to look out for partners, for companies that are going to produce apps or software or even systems that the carrier could use. Their whole job is to find that out. So you should find events where you can sort of interact in a very intimate environment with this kind of a demographic. The other thing that they all emphasized is you focus on building something of value. So don't spend a lot of time, a lot of your mental cycles thinking about how the operator is going to make revenue with your idea. Leave it to them. They understand how to sell to their customers. They understand the needs of the customers. Of course, you as a startup and an entrepreneurial group need to understand that as well. But your focus should be on creating value for the operator and finding the best way to do that. And then leave it to the operator to convert that into revenue for themselves and, of course, revenue for you. So this again goes back to one of the guiding principles that came out of the TC3 takeaways. That's on a different video, which is, value first, revenue second. So as an entrepreneur, focus on the value. Now, the other very important thing all of these sort of CXOs emphasize is that even if you get your foot in the door, remember that it's the product groups that, or the product line management that really decides whether something gets implemented in the network or not, because they're the ones managing the growth and evolution of the network. So it's their decision that finally controls that. Now, the way the CXOs on this panel, and similarly the innovation officers and such, the people whose job is to go scout for new ideas and talent, the way they can help you is that they understand the needs of these product line management people within the telcos 6 or 12 months out. So, of course, as you might imagine, product line management is very focused on tactical issues. But it's really the strategic issues that you as the entrepreneur and the company need to be keeping your eyes on. So how do you do that? The way you do it is that these CXOs and similarly placed officials in the telcos are cognizant of what the needs are 6 to 12 months down the line, which is the sweet spot that you as the entrepreneur and new company needs to hit. Or they can guide you in that, okay? And they can therefore put you in front of the right groups at the right time. And timing, as you know, is critical with operators, and timing is everything. So that, in a nutshell, are the answers to the 5 questions, the key questions that I believe every startup or entrepreneurial group that's looking to do business with the telcos should be asking, and they should be answering. Now, in addition to that, all of these CXOs were kind enough to share what I call certain rules of engagement that you must always keep in mind as you approach the telcos. And here are some of the generic ones. One is, please don't send form emails, all right? They're easy to tell. They can tell them a mile apart. So if you're going to send them an email, please personalize it, address specific needs, make it content rich, make it something that they are going to get their attention. Of course, you go back to the first principles. If you've done your homework, if you understood what the country is that they operate in, what the environment is, what they operate in, what their customer base looks like, if you're doing the sort of hard work of thinking what the needs of that customer base are going to be, I think it's pretty easy to create an email that may grab attention or that is tailored to the specific needs of the operator. So that's one. And now in Europe specifically, the recommendation was that please do not just go to the highest person in the company, but go via the designated point of contact who does this for a living. So they have titles like business development or innovation or strategy in their titles. They're easy to find on various forums such as a LinkedIn, or just simply by searching on the web. Even if you don't have any starting contact point, you can easily find one by doing this basic background research, and then that's the contact you want to approach. Now, some other universal guiding principles is you must get educated about the culture and the customs of the country where the operator is working, all right? And the way you do that is you find somebody in that country that understands how things work there, and you seek their guidance, you seek their partnership, you consult with them and so forth. In Japan specifically, Tomofumi pointed out that you need either a local entity or a local office, a local presence, or you need a very good partner in Japan. And either way, you need somebody who speaks Japanese, who can be that interface with the Japanese telcos, the Japanese officials, and the Japanese marketplace. That's critical. In the Philippines, Winston pointed out that, look, Smart is kind of a different carrier. It's a disruptor itself. It's a new wave carrier. Okay, it's looking at it identifies itself as an operator that's looking to break the rules, and therefore it identifies with entrepreneurs and startups that are themselves rule breakers and that have their own persona. So if you understand the sort of psychology of Smart, you can now present yourself in a way that is more likely to get their attention if you have a persona or you radiate a persona that sort of jives with their way of thinking. So basically, the bottom line is you've got to get to know who you're going to work with on the other side and who is the telco and the market that you're going to go after. And in the Czech Republic, Gustav gave a very good suggestion. He said, look, don't just look at the telco market, but look at the entire ecosystem inside the country and at least make some attempts to understand that, which goes back to the first principles of doing your research on the country, which is something that all of these executives emphasized in various points in the discussion. And now Gary Cohen himself gave some wonderful inputs for the US market. Look, there are three possibilities for you as a startup or an entrepreneurial group to approach a telco. One is you can do it yourself, which is a very long and arduous process, and probably one that should be your first choice, unless you already have some connections and you're able to leverage those. The other is you hire a seasoned veteran or a consultant to work as part of your team, somebody who's done this, hundreds of times, who understands the ins and outs of navigating the telco corridors and can help you in that endeavor by giving you critical insights that you absolutely need to cut that process short and to short circuit a very long and a very lengthy process. And lastly, you can, of course, if depending on your relationships and the kind of product you're developing, invite appropriate carriers who are interested in that to be on your board of directors, and thereby leverage their insights, their network, and their information, while at the same time developing a friendly customer who's more likely to be interested in what you're doing, can guide you in the development, and ultimately help you come up with a product or a service that is very suited to what they're looking to do or implement in their own networks. So that's the thing. And the two sort of counterintuitive insights, or at least the one counterintuitive insight that also came out of this group was, and a lot of sort of startups or entrepreneurs think that the higher up the food chain you go, the higher up the organizational ladder you go, maybe you approach the CEO or the CXOs or the CTOs directly, and that's the way to do it. But the advice from this panel was that that may not be your best choice. And the reason that the CEOs and CXOs, the CTOs, they have sort of a lot of different things on their mind, and they may not be the most well-versed with the specific technologies or the specific issues that you are most interested in. And they may not know those details. So what you really need to do is to find the highest level person within the carrier, within the telco, who deals with the technologies that you are developing and that you are responsible for, and then start a dialogue with that person. And as we said earlier, the way to do that is to find intimate settings, small conferences. TC3 is of course one example, but there are many others, meetups, what have yous. Because as I said in a different video, today in Silicon Valley, we have more than 35 operators that have set up shop there. And they are actively seeking out entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial groups and companies that will help them in their endeavors of modernizing their network, developing new services, developing new applications, serving their customers. So there are lots of opportunities in Silicon Valley to do that. And if you look in your local markets, no matter where you are in the world, I'm sure there are similar opportunities everywhere to make that happen. And today, if you cannot do that live, maybe you can at least start that dialogue by doing some attending online events, attending online gatherings where the operators are showing up, engaging with them that way, hearing what they are saying, and then using that knowledge to write to them at the right level and starting a dialogue with them. And then the last point I want to leave you with is that you should always also look at where the investment groups of the operators are investing their money, because that's a big guiding light to what the operators consider important. And Telstra, for example, has been investing in wireless technologies. Some of the two-tier operators in France have been investing in set-top boxes. So that already gives you a clue as to where they're thinking they want to serve the customer best. And that's where you want to go. EE in the UK has been investing in coverage, and they've been partnering with companies that can help extend that coverage. So once you understand sort of the key priorities and the key focuses of these operators, it becomes a lot easier to figure out whether your value proposition is going to work with the operator you were thinking about, or maybe there are other operators in the world, and there are very many that you might approach. And in fact, that brings me to one very interesting point that Gary mentioned, which is that there are in the US alone 300 carriers right now looking for a differentiator in the US market, and these are sort of tier 2, tier 3 operators, and they are ripe for looking at innovative disruptors that may come and want to talk to them. So that's where an open market that you can go talk to. And the other insight was that, of course, in trying to get to work with someone, you must work to get someone to work with. What that means? What that really means is that, okay, you may have your sights set on some tier 1 operators. They are the hardest to reach and the most difficult and the most time consuming to work with. Although if you find the right contact, that process can certainly be streamlined. So if you look at the wireless market, for example, after the two or four tier 1 operators in the US, Sprint, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, you have to go to tier 2, which is US Cellular, and then after that, there's a whole bunch of other smaller operators like C-Spire or Bluegrass Cellular and so on. Which are also very good operators to work with. So in your quest to try to find some operator to work with, do not forget that your most important job is to get to work with someone first. And sometimes the smaller operators are actually a very good demographic to focus on, because they can work with the entrepreneur a lot more closely. They can give you a lot more insights. You can refine some of these insights and then go to larger operators if that's what your market is. So that's the other piece of advice I want to leave you with. So my last parting thought is that what has been your experience in working with operators or in attempting to work with operators, and what other insights or questions would you add to this list of 5 questions? And which of these 5 questions resonate with you? Which of them don't resonate with you, and which new ones would you want to see on the list? I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love for you to either comment on this video or join a discussion of the Carry Ethernet group, which is focused on all aspects of, as we say, modern packet networking, the business, technology, and strategy of modern packet networking. Or you can write to me directly at vsharma@metanoia-inc.com. So I look forward to hearing from you. And as I always say in every one of these videos, until next time, may the bits in your bytes and the bytes in your packets remain profitable. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.